course. Well, look, so part of what's happening in our society at the moment that's tearing it apart is constant accusations of the abuse of power. And so there's a doctrine that's come out of postmodernism, and it's kind of unholy alliance with Marxism. And the doctrine is something like all motivation can be traced to power. That's a very toxic doctrine, the doctrine that all motivation can be traced to power. So let me outline that a little bit. So a lot of people think that there's a debate about who should be allowed to speak in our society, right? So we might think about that as the free speech debate, and we might think about cancel culture as the attempt to stop certain people from exercising their right to free speech. But that is not what the debate is about. That's only the paint on the surface of a very thick wall, let's say, because the actual debate is more like this. The postmodern types, especially if they have a Marxist tilt, and they almost always do, their critique was much deeper than that. Their critique was that the idea of free speech itself is a lie. And it was a lie that was created by the powerful to justify their exploitation by pretending that they valued free expression and the dignity of individuals. And so, even though it sounds like a profound and positive proposition, the idea that people have the right to free speech, it was nothing but a mask for power. And so when people are canceled on campus by this system of ideas, because it's really a system of ideas in some sense that cancels them, the reason they're canceled is because, so here's why you and I are talking according to this doctrine. You have a following. As a consequence of that following, you've accrued a certain amount of power. You can bring me in here as a tool, let's say, to ratchet yourself up the status hierarchy. You can act like we're sharing information in a way that might be designed to enlighten both of us and our readers or our listeners. But in reality, all you're doing is trying to elevate yourself up the status hierarchy. And if you don't know that, you're just ignorant, and if you're and blind, and you're even more dangerous than you would be if you were conscious of your true motivations. And so it's all about power. Now, that's just not true. It's not all about power. And in fact, if you try to govern your relationships based on power, your true relationships, you will fail. Mm-hmm. So imagine that your wife, let's say, you're going to just use power to interact with her. Well, try it and see what happens. You know, she's going to be miserable, and she's going to be resentful for sure. And maybe she's got more power than you when push comes to shove. Who the hell knows? Women aren't that easy to oppress. And so they have their own bag of tricks, that's for sure. And so, but at minimum, you're going to be setting yourself up for a loveless relationship based on mutual suspicion. And then imagine you tried to use power on your kids. Well, now and then you might have to use discipline. You might have to lay out the game rules, which isn't the same as like constraining them with oppression. But if your fundamental relationship with your kids is one of dominance, you're just a tyrant. And then if you try using that on your friends, well, first of all, you won't have any friends. The best you'll ever manage is henchmen, and they'll only be around you because they think they can get something out of your power. So they're the worst kind of friend because they're not even confident enough bullies to be bullies on their own. They have to hide behind another bully and be sub-bullies, and that's a dismal outcome. And then if you use power in your business relationships, it's like no one's going to be aligned with you, and the first time you make a mistake and you show any sign of weakness, your so-called business associates that you've just dominated because you have the power, they're just going to stab you in the back and leave. So it's a preposterous theory. It doesn't even work for chimpanzees. So the best work that's been done on chimps so far is being done by Frans de Waal. He'd be a very interesting guest, by the way. He's a very smart Dutch primatologist.
If you have his number.
Yeah, I could connect you. De Waal has been studying chimpanzees for 3 decades, and he's written a series of books about the emergence of proto-morality in chimpanzees. Now, chimps have to live in a social group, and for decades, and they have, you might as well call them friendships, because that's the closest analog, and they have to maintain those friendships. And they can't maintain them by dominance because, well, then obviously it's not a friendship. They have to maintain it by mutual grooming and caretaking. And so what de Waal has shown is that the alpha chimp, so you think of the alpha chimp as the roughest, toughest chimp in the troop, you know, he's banging on sticks and threatening everybody, and he clambers his way up the hierarchy just like the Marxists would assume, and he establishes sexual superiority and propagates his genes. And the truth of the matter is, that's better than being weak and useless and dying, but it's not nearly as good as being genuinely reciprocal. And so what DeWaal has shown is that sometimes the alpha chimp male is the smallest male in the troop, so that's pretty damn interesting. But more to the point, the alpha chimp is the most reciprocal member of the entire troop. So he's keeping track of his social relations, he's grooming his friends, they're interacting constantly, like he's maintaining social relationships like mad. And there's two advantages to that, apart from the fact that he attains a certain degree of a reverence, let's say, and authority, and some preferential sexual access, so it's a good biological strategy. The troop is also more stable emotionally, partly because it's not ruled by a tyrant, let's say, who's always disrupting things, but the alpha who's reciprocal also can have a long reign, because if you're one of those chimps that use manipulation and power to climb up the hierarchy, as soon as you show a sign of weakness, two of the males that you've oppressed will gang together, which chimps are very good at, and tear you into bits. And so DeWaal has written very frightening accounts, very graphic accounts of these like revolutions against tyranny in chimp groups. And so the people who claim that power is the only motivation, they don't have a leg to stand on. It's just not true. And there's one more thing that goes along with that. Two more things. One is, if you think power is the only motivation, that's your whole theory, then you're justified in using power at every step, because there's nothing but power. So why not use power? And so it's a confession more than an accusation. And second, this is sort of germane to your criticism of the Queen. When systems deteriorate, power emerges as a fundamental motivation. And so part of the reason the Marxists and the postmodernists can be so attractive in their critique is because power does corrupt. And so whenever you look at any enterprise, social enterprise, any family structure, even any relationship someone has with themselves, you can say, well, look, to some degree you're corrupted by misuse of power. And sometimes that can go way out of control, right, and be the dominant phenomenon that happens in totalitarian states. And you say, well, it's all about power. Well, it is when things get entirely corrupted. But that's a whole different proposition than everything's based on power. It's more like, well, hold it. Everything corrupt is based on power. But not everything is corrupt. And so now if you look at the monarchy, well, right, then you think, okay, well, how do you separate the wheat from the chaff, right? How do you give the institution its due? You have the same problem with the British Empire, let's say, or with any expansive political enterprise. It's like, well, it's done some good, what's the good? And then it's abused its power. Well, how do we decide what's good and maintain that and value it? And how do we discern what's a misuse of power and criticize it properly and dispense with it?